Greetings, I'm Doug Grove, and I'm one of the authors of Multidimensional Education, a common sense approach to data-driven thinking. Today we're going to take a look at the 7 different steps that we propose for looking at and improving the 4 C's. And today specifically we're going to take a look closely at an example of how you might go through the 7 steps with the C of curriculum. If you think back to chapter 3 in the book, we began to unpack what these 7 different steps look like. And what you'll see as you go through chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, and chapter 8, which all cover the 4 C's, curriculum, climate, community, and character, those chapters also go through this same 7-step process. So we're going to see this replicated in those chapters, and we're going to cover it each time when we get to that C. So let's start with the C of curriculum, and if you have your book, you can take a look at page 149, where we're going to focus specifically on how a school looked at the C of curriculum within their school setting. First step in looking at the C of curriculum was to ask the right questions. And for this example, those 4 questions are we holding our students to high enough expectations in learning? Probably a question that most schools ask. Question 2, how is the instruction at the school being perceived by the students and the parents? This school did the multidimensional assessment in the spring, so they had that information to look at in the fall when they started planning for the new school year. Question 3, are we offering enough extra support for low achieving and high achieving students? How are we meeting the needs of our low achievers as well as our high achievers? And then question 4 for this school was, are we teaching in a creative manner that engages students to learn? They had some questions about how they were actually engaging students in the learning process. So the first step for them was to ask the right questions. The second step for them was to collect and organize their data. As I mentioned, they had already done the multidimensional assessment in the spring at the end of the school year. So they had their reports and they had the ability to look at some of that data. The other thing they also did is they took advantage of that curriculum walkthrough that's in the pages of your book, and they had their faculty and their administrators do the walkthrough for about a week and go through and look at what was happening and look at how things were happening as far as the curriculum was going at that school. The third step, and what they did, is they had these buyback days at the beginning of the school year. They had probably 4 days where they could decide what they were going to do related to school improvement. And they actually decided to take a day, and you can see there's an agenda there in the book that shows how they structured that day around discussing and reflecting, which is step 3, on the data that they had collected. And there's a couple examples of issues that they came up with, and one of the examples was this issue of student engagement. There was a real feeling, and there was some information coming out of the data that showed them that as they walked through and looked into classrooms, they did not see students engaged. And their multidimensional assessment data also told them that students were not engaged. They had several other things going on as well, but that was one that was specific to them. So what they did around that planning session and looking at that data, they took advantage of step 4, which is to set goals and create some target planning. Within that, they came up with several different things by grade level, by discipline, that they could do to improve student engagement. Next thing they did was to go back and take advantage of step 5 and to actually implement some of those student engagement components. One of the big things that they looked at as well is actual time on task and how they were either maximizing or minimizing the amount of student time on task. Take, for example, one of the things that they looked at was, you know what, we're spending way too much time taking attendance, we're spending way too much time on transitions. That is lost time, and that's lost time where students could be engaged. Once they did step 5, implement, they then did step 6, which is to monitor and to fine-tune. In monitoring and fine-tuning, they had the opportunity to go out again and observe to see if, do we see any changes in student engagement? Can we witness any changes? Are students appearing to be more engaged? And then they could bring that information back and talk about it and discuss it. Step 7 then is to evaluate and communicate. And two things important about step 7. Certainly, once we have goals, once we implement, once we monitor, then we really need to evaluate and say, okay, how did we do on our goals? Were we effective? Do we need to keep working on this goal? Or is this a goal something that we have accomplished? And then secondly, which is of primary importance, is communication. How do we come back together as a faculty and staff and talk about this endeavor of improving student engagement such as this school did in this instance? And one of the things that's kind of neat about this school, and I think is a great practice, is every time there's a faculty meeting, there was an intentionality of bringing these goals back up and bringing these goals out right at the beginning of the faculty meeting and saying, remember, maybe it was the principal leading it, saying, remember guys, here are the goals that we are working on now for this next year. We have this goal on student engagement, and we have some of these other goals we're working on, and we're going to be monitoring these, and we're going to be evaluating our progress at the end of the year. So again, just to kind of recap, your 7 steps on the curriculum and also on the other 3 C's are to ask the right questions. The second step is to collect and organize the data. The third step is to discuss and reflect on the data. The fourth step is to set the goals and do the target planning. The 5th step is that implementation, and that's the step that we want to make sure that we get to, because that's an important step. That's where something really starts to happen. The 6th step is to monitor and maybe fine-tune. Maybe we had some goals, plans, and objectives that we need to tweak a little bit. And then our 7th step is to evaluate and communicate our progress. Sometimes we may make great strides. Sometimes we may not make strides at all. And we have to realize that that's a reality of this work that we're doing. But what we're really doing in the 7 steps is really focusing our efforts towards school improvement.